You guys with the Agape?
No.
Huh?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis left?
What is it?
I'm telling you. So they come up both sides. Are we live?
He hasn't said.
What the fuck is to y'all?
So if you're just tuning in, we are streaming live from Minneapolis. We are right in front of the 5th Precinct, Nicollet Avenue and 31st Street. You're seeing the State Patrol is moving in on a peaceful protest. What we did see when we first arrived on the scene was protesters moving these gates, these barricades right here that normally go right in front of the precinct to protect the precinct from any, damage. And so protesters moved it to guard them. And so we're seeing patrols come in on one end and state patrols come in from another end. When we drove up, there were over 100 officers that were communicating with each other in a nearby parking lot in the abandoned Kmart parking lot.
The area
that is on Lake Street. We're seeing State Patrol now moving the barricades that have been placed to come near the protesters. They're removing the barricades.
This is the Minnesota State Patrol. You're in violation of an unlawful assembly. If you do not cease your unlawful behavior and disperse peacefully, you will be arrested.
As you can hear on the big amplifier, the State Patrol is communicating to the protesters that they are considering this an unlawful gathering, and they're asking that protesters move immediately. Since we've arrived on the scene, we've seen no destruction, no destruction of property. This was a peaceful protest. We know that there was a march earlier. Individuals are standing here in Minneapolis protesting the release of Derek Chauvin, who is charged for the murder of George Floyd. And so he was released on a bond today, a non-cash bond. We do have more information on that on our website, unicornriot.ninja. But right now, we're streaming live Minneapolis right in front of the 5th Precinct. Protesters have come here, and as you can see, they're retreating. They're standing back. They're taking steps backwards as State Patrol are moving in. They have their billy clubs in hand.
This is the Minnesota State Patrol. You are in violation of an unlawful assembly. Leave the area to the south on Nicollet. If you do not cease your unlawful behavior and disperse peacefully, you will be arrested.
One of the National Guards over here, you can see he has what looks like an AK-47 in his hand. He's also communicating. You can see he has a microphone right in front of his mouth.
Leave the area now.
And so,
but then look at south.
And so what we've noticed since we've been here is State Patrol asking the crowd to move south down Nicollet, which they are complying. They are moving back. But if you look back behind down Nicollet, you can also see there that there are some cops down there as well. So
Which way should we go? You got cops here too. Where the hell are we supposed to go? Where are we supposed to go? They got cops in every direction. Hey, it's all they go to go. Which way do we go? Where the hell are we supposed to go?
protesters are asking where are they supposed to go. because at this point they're entirely surrounded by officers. And so we see one cop here is starting to raise, I don't know, he's got his I don't know, I don't think it's a gun, but he's starting to raise whatever defense mechanism he's equipped with at this moment, while other people are kind of holding billy clubs. It looks like he has some type of,
I think it's for marker rounds.
For marker rounds potentially. And these
are the DNR officers.
So some of these are conservation officers, DNR officers that are out here with the State Patrol. They are now completely moving the barricade that was put up by protesters. And then now we have individuals who are gathering on the other side of the line. State Patrol is moving in to reclaim the 5th Precinct. They have entirely removed the barricade. If you're just tuning in, we're streaming live in front of the 5th Precinct. Over 100 officers.
Leave the area. Continue south on Nicollet.
We're seeing State Patrol here tonight, conservation officers with DNR, the National Guard as well. Protesters are continuing to retreat, moving away from the State Patrol, moving back in the direction in which they were requested. What we heard over the big amplifier earlier was State Patrol asking the crowd to move south down Nicollet, which, as you can see, they have.
Continue south on Nicollet. Leave the area.
You're continuing to hear those demands. That is the non-rage acoustic device. Long range acoustic.
This is the Minnesota State Patrol. You are in violation of an unlawful assembly. You do not cease your unlawful behavior and disperse peaceably, you will be arrested.
It won't be my first rodeo!
So we're continuing to see State Patrol use multiple different tactics. That was some type of audio tactic to disrupt protesters and to get them to move back. We're seeing them now, if you take a look, they're actually moving forward rather aggressively. Over 100 State Patrol, conservation officers, and National Guard out here. We're seeing one protester here take a knee. As you can see, the protesters have moved back almost 100 feet from the intersection of 31st and Nicollet here in Minneapolis, right in front of the 5th Precinct. Protesters continue to retreat. The one protester who took a knee here has gotten up and started to retreat as well. State Patrol holding the line currently.
This is the Minnesota State Patrol. You are now all under arrest. Please sit on the pavement. Take a seat on the pavement. Do it now.
And if you're just tuning in, Derek Chauvin was released from jail. He was able to get out tonight on a non-cash bond, and so individuals in Minneapolis have been protesting that since about 6 o'clock. There was a protest that started at George Floyd Square, right on the corner where George Floyd was killed. That protest went around different neighborhoods in Minneapolis. And then after that protest was over, individuals came here to the 5th Precinct. And so it looks like protesters were asked to come this way. Protesters were asked to come south on Nicollet. And then now, after coming this way, they've been ambushed by Minneapolis police. who are arresting the protesters who are out here. And so the State Patrol, the conservation officers, DNR, started towards the left of us, right in front of the 5th Precinct, and they demanded that protesters move south down Nicollet.
Lay down on the ground. You are under arrest.
Protesters.
Lay down on the ground. Do it now.
Protesters complied.
Trapped us in. How are we supposed to leave? You're under arrest.
We're pressed.
We're pressed.
You're under arrest.
We're pressed.
You're all under arrest. Get down on
We're pressed. So now we're being threatened that we're going to be arrested. Protesters complied. Protesters listened as officers requested them to retreat south on Nicollet. Protesters complied with the demands. They retreated south without incident. And as they retreated south, now they're being threatened that they're going to be arrested. And we are also being threatened that we're going to be arrested. So we're live streaming here in Minneapolis. If you're just tuning in, the 5th Precinct, State Patrol is moving in. They asked that protesters retreat. It looks like now State Patrol is coming to communicate with some of the organizers who are here.
But at this point, we just need you to comply. Okay. So if you just want to sit down on the ground for now, and we'll get it all sorted out.
But just do the office by prevention.
Yep, understood. So we'll make the phone calls that are necessary there, up through Minneapolis chain of command there.
Yep, that's fine.
But for the time being,
okay.
Just so we can ensure a
On
safe.
the sidewalk right here on the curb?
Actually, if you just want to sit right on the side.
Yep, we'll do that.
So it sounds like State Patrol has committed to.
Captain.
We're trying to hear from Captain, but he is.
We're pressed, Lieutenant.
This is the Minnesota State Patrol, and you're in violation of Minnesota Statute 169.
So the community outreach folks who are out here they were told that if they sat down, that State Patrol would make whatever calls through the chain of command to Minneapolis Police Department to ensure that there potentially will not be any arrests, is kind of what it sounded like. And so he said if everybody just complies, that they will go through the proper chain of commands to get everything straightened out, but that everybody needed to sit down and comply with the demands that they were issuing over their loudspeaker. And so what we are seeing is that the majority of the peaceful protesters are complying, but we do see more than a dozen individuals who have been handcuffed at this point and are continuing to be handcuffed. And we were also threatened by one of the Minneapolis Police Department officers that we would be arrested as well. And so based on what we just learned from the State Patrol captain, we will kind of wait it out and see what happens here at the Minneapolis 5th Precinct. So as you can see here, dozens of individuals have laid down and complied with demands, but we do see it looks like a few folks have been handcuffed. Not 100% sure if they're handcuffed or if it's the plastic ties that have been, it's the plastic ties that they're putting around their wrists. So as you can see right here, this officer is putting a plastic tie around this young lady's hand. She's laying flat on the pavement with her face down. The protesters here are being told to be down on their stomach, hands behind their back. They're under arrest. We see more than a dozen, what looks like, can't tell if they're state patrol. They're moving in.
Those are state patrol.
Yep, state patrol is moving in. More than a dozen. So we're seeing more plastic wraps being distributed. Individuals are being told that they're going to be arrested. So we're seeing more plastic cuffs being distributed at this time. About a dozen people.
Sir?
Excuse me, officer. So to the right, it almost, from what I've observed, there were some plastic cuffs that were brought this way. And those plastic cuffs are actually in the hands of this officer here who is talking to State Patrol. And so my guess would be that those plastic cuffs were brought over here for this row of individuals who was told by the captain of State Patrol that they had nothing to worry about if they complied. We've witnessed them comply. And so this officer has told everybody to stay quiet and get on the sidewalk, and they're continuing to comply. And so what we're seeing in the front is one of the Minneapolis police officers talk to the National Guard, and it looks like they're giving the community outreach folks the right to leave. Now over here behind us, we're seeing more individuals, more protesters be cuffed.
Right here?
Sit down, sit down, right there. Sit down, sit down.
Officer, we're
sit
pressed.
down.
Can we move around? We haven't been able to
Sit
talk to
down,
somebody.
sit down, sit down.
So we're asking for some type of guidance or permission on the rights that we have to move around in this space right now. But every time that Nico, who's behind the camera, or myself has tried to talk to an officer, they've kind of shooed us away, and no one has really addressed us. We were threatened about 10 minutes ago. One of the Minneapolis police officers told us that we needed to get down and that we were under arrest, despite the fact of him knowing and seeing that we're live streaming and Nico showing his press credentials. So we'll just kind of wait and see. But we did see more than a dozen community outreach folks who were organized in orange shirts that were given permission to leave. Outside of that, those people, all of the other protesters who were here, who kind of got caught in this ambush, are now being told that they're going to be arrested. And so when we arrived on the scene, we saw organized group, more than 100 officers who were starting to move in on the 5th precinct, where more than 100 people were gathered protesting. And so as they moved in, they gave demands for protesters to move south on Nicollet. The crowd continued to move back. They moved back probably about 100 feet. And after moving back and complying with the demands and no incidents, they were ambushed by the Minneapolis Police Department, who then has started to place these protesters under arrest. And so this is all stemming from the release of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. He got out on bail today on a non-cash bond. We see this guy in a scooter who's trying to leave the perimeter. State Patrol tried to stop him. And so there was a shot fired at the gentleman on the scooter who tried to leave the perimeter. And it appears as though he made it out safely. We're seeing more than, I'd probably say about 24 folks out here right now who are under arrest, and about 12 individuals who have been allowed to leave this perimeter. We're here in Minneapolis at the 5th Precinct. Again, this protest all formed as a result of the releasing of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who was arrested for the murder of George Floyd. He got out today on a non-cash bond. And so the community responded, demanding justice for George Floyd, and just, saying that they don't feel like him being released from jail was the right thing. And so that protest started at about 6 o'clock on the corner where George Floyd was killed. And that protest turned into a march that went through the South Minneapolis community. And after that march dispersed, there was a group of individuals who came here to the 5th Precinct. We saw, when we arrived, probably 200 individuals here. And soon after we arrived, the State Patrol, the Minneapolis Police Department started moving in. And as they started to move in again, they told protesters to move south down Nicollet. The State Patrol was able to regain ground because when we got here, the protest was actually in the middle of this intersection here. And so they gradually gained back ground. But as that happened, as protesters complied with the orders from State Patrol, protesters moved back probably about 100 feet, and then they were ambushed from behind by the Minneapolis Police Department, who has now got about 24 individuals under arrest here. Again, we were also threatened at one point. I don't know if they're going to carry out those threats. Obviously, we're hoping that they don't. But we did see more than 12 community outreach leaders who were all in orange gear. They were able to successfully leave outside of this perimeter. About maybe 5 minutes ago, we saw a guy in a scooter who tried to get out of this perimeter. He successfully made it past one line of State Patrol. However, there was a shot that was aimed at him. I don't think that it hit him, although I can't see around the building that he went behind. And so we're here streaming in front of the 5th Precinct at this point, totally surrounded by State Patrol and Minneapolis police, and a little uncertain of how this is exactly going to end for us. It looks like about 24 protesters will be arrested tonight. As you can see over here, 4 ladies are all, they have their hands behind their back. And yeah, they have been told that they're going to be arrested.
We can't feel our fingers. There's no flex in these. They call them flex cuffs, but we can't feel our fingers. Excuse me, could you put my mask on? Mine's around my wrist. Oh, Georgia and Nico, this is fun.
Excuse me, I'm gonna have you guys go on the other side of this police line, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep, keep going, please. Don't run into the cop behind you, please.
And so we, for the first time, have been addressed directly by one of the officers who who is asking us to go on the other side of 31st. So at this point, we will not be able to show anything of what's happening to the individuals who have been placed under arrest. We have been instructed to go beyond this perimeter that they have created. They have requested that we go to 31st. And so we are exiting the perimeter. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We've been asked to move back past 31st. We see the National Lawyers Guild Observer is here. These individuals here with the green hats who typically come out to offer aid and legal advice and counsel to protesters who have been placed under arrest. Would any of you be interested in making a quick statement about why you're here? And no? Okay. So there's about 24 protesters who have been placed under arrest. If you've been with us for a while, you saw some of that happen. So now we're seeing the conservation officers standing here. There's about 10 of them that are holding this perimeter here, now keeping the press and keeping any speculators kind of behind this line here, right in front of the 5th Precinct. And so, we're uncertain, at this point, what the future holds for these protesters, but we do know we saw them comply when the State Patrol started moving in and asking and demanding that they move back every time they retreated. And so, this is all in response to the release of Derek Chauvin.
The protest down by the George Floyd memorial? Oh, I guess she doesn't care. Earlier today, I heard the National Guard popped out to 30 in Chicago because there was supposed to be a protest out there. Because if you don't know, Derek Chauvin got released from prison today. He got released on no cash bond, which means he put something down. He couldn't put a card out for murder arrest. So I'm guessing he put his whole house down as bail. But yeah, I'm out here in the precinct, and that's a little bit of a story.
So it looks kind of like they're moving some of the protesters. I know they have a large vehicle that could potentially be used to transport them. But it's challenging to see. Oh, you can see here, there's an individual coming out in a red hoodie. His hands are behind his back. Another individual coming out in a gray sweatshirt, a gray jogging suit. And so it looks like at this point they are going to be detained. So now they're actually bringing them back south on Nicollet. It looks like there's some type of conversation that's happening. And actually inside of this transit hub, we see 2 State Patrol officers who are talking to a young lady. And it almost looks like they are trying to get some information from her. They're making a report, writing some information down. And then the 2 individuals, now 3, that I can see from where I'm standing are being searched. When these folks were placed under arrest, they were told that they were being arrested for unlawful assembly, which is really, to be honest, hard to believe because, you know, these folks were here protesting and complied with every demand that was made by State Patrol. For about 10 minutes, State Patrol moved in, demanded that they move back, and the protesters complied with every demand. Unfortunately, after complying with demands for over 10 minutes, they were ambushed from behind by the Minneapolis Police Department, who then started arresting the protesters. And so to kind of see this whole thing unfold is really mind-boggling. You know, when we cover these types of things, this is definitely not how you want to see them turn out. Especially when you're witnessing protesters that are complying with orders, moving back, retreating, and, you know, not being destructive, not being violent. And so it was shocking to all of us who were here after witnessing those protesters retreat and move back and in the direction that they were being told. They were demanded, they were told to move south down Nicollet. And they did move south down Nicollet, but about halfway down the block, they were ambushed by Minneapolis police officers who then put them under arrest. And so here now we have
612442654.
We have the National Lawyers Guild observers who are here, who are yelling out. They are yelling out the law number they're yelling out the number to jail support. I assume that they were yelling out the number of the statute that allows protesters to gather and protest peacefully. But they're yelling out the number for legal support so that these protesters can get some legal aid. In addition to that, there was one of the individuals who's been placed under arrest who yelled out, "Can someone please call my mom?" And she screamed out the number to her mother. And so these advocates are here taking notes and are committing to making phone calls and helping these individuals who are being arrested tonight out. So we have another group here with a megaphone who is singing "We Love You." She said to the people getting arrested, "We love you." So lots of support, lots of appreciation and gratitude to the individuals who have made a sacrifice today, standing in solidarity and ultimately protesting the release of ex-Minneapolis officer Derek Chauvin. And so we're seeing more and more individuals. It seems kind of like what their process is after they handcuff folks, they're bringing them here into this Metro Transit hub, which appears to be the information center, where they're gathering information from the individuals after they're patted down. And then once all of their information is gathered, then they are escorting them here to these stairs, where they're then having them wait until there's some formal transportation, I suppose, to escort them to jail.
Where do you want me to stand? Bro, that one's Electro Giant. New character. New character. There's the line I can't cross here.
Y'all suppose y'all smell like shit and y'all eat Trump's dick.
Just can't cross the line here. This one?
Everybody getting arrested, listen up. This is the number for the lawyer. It's 612-444-2654. That's for the NLG. Make sure you call them. They'll get some bail. It's 612-444-2654. That's for the lawyer.
No, we've been running. Yeah, they got them. Can you also tell them to not tell the police anything?
Don't tell these motherfuckers anything, y'all. Keep your mouth shut back there.
Don't tell them shit.
They beat us.
Bro, they're not running over there.
Was someone trying to give us their name?
So we have a few advocates here with a megaphone who are delivering messages for the Lawyers Guild, who is trying to make sure that these protesters have access to the phone number for legal support.
612-444-2654.
And also just a bit of information was communicated over the megaphone to not tell the officers anything. So now we're seeing some movement. Conservation officers are moving forward. We just saw about 10 officers come forward. My guess is that there's a small group of agitators who were not here during the protest, who just kind of showed up and started saying kind of crude and disrespectful things to the officers, instigating and kind of agitating the situation. And so as a result, now we've just seen about 10 more officers move forward.
You're a bunch of bitches. Shame on you. And you're conservation officers. You fucking work for wildlife, don't you? You're out here fucking treating us like we're animals. Merciless Indian savages, huh? It's in your fucking Declaration of Independence that y'all take some motherfucking pride in. Shit ain't changed since y'all wrote that dumbass shit. We're human too. We bleed the same color, motherfuckers. You got us fucked up.
You ain't conserving life. You ain't conserving shit. Except for the powers that be. Shame on you.
Again, the numbers for the NLG is 612-444-2654.
Look at her eyes. She's scared, bro. I don't want to be here.
612-444-2654. 2654.
Every single person.
And they got 500 people. They got 500 trucks.
I just got word from one of the NLG that when you're in there, don't not say anything. They got recording rights everywhere, so don't say anything. Don't give them shit.
Your name is lawyer. Your name is I want my lawyer.
Your name is I want your lawyer. He said it.
I guess give them their name like that. I don't know. I'm not with the NLG. I'm just getting the messages. The National Guard here again just to fucking stand there and look stupid.
So if you're just tuning in, we are streaming live in Minneapolis. There was a protest in front of the 5th Precinct, and we saw
What's your mom's number?
over 100 State Patrol officers come in from every direction demanding protesters retreat. Those demands were complied with. However, the demands that were given were for protesters to move south down Nicollet. As protesters moved south down Nicollet, after they got about a half a block down, they were ambushed by Minneapolis police officers, who then began arresting these protesters and citing unlawful assembly for the reason why they're being arrested. And so now we're kind of seeing that they've created somewhat of a makeshift process here. And so all of the protesters who were put in the plastic cuffs are now being escorted here to this Metro Transit hub, where they're being questioned and forced to give over their information. And then those individuals are being patted down and then escorted to these stairs nearby, where they're just kind of waiting. We assume maybe some transportation will come and escort them to jail. But we have seen advocates with the Lawyers Guild who are here, who have been shouting the number for legal support continuously, and who they've also been taking notes from the protesters who have been asking for phone calls to be made on their behalf. There was one young lady who shouted out, "Can someone please call my mom?" And so someone asked from the Lawyers Guild, "What is her number?" And so after that, the individual with Lawyers Guild wrote the number down and has committed to calling that individual's mother. And so that number for legal support is continuously being yelled over this megaphone for the 24 protesters who have been arrested for unlawful assembly. Again, there was a moment there where we were uncertain if we were going to be placed under arrest as well. During our live stream, which you'll be able to go back and watch, we were told by a Minneapolis police officer that we were going to be arrested as well and that we need to get down. However, about 15 minutes later, the captain of the State Patrol said that they would be communicating through their chain of command to the Minneapolis Police Department to let some of us out. And so we were among maybe about 15 to 20 people who were allowed to leave the perimeter. Along with us were a few other members of press and individuals from an organization called Minneapolis Us. And so now we're hearing music played over a megaphone here. We're continuing to see the perimeter secured by conservation officers as well as State Patrol. There's been about a handful of National Guards here. We haven't seen too many National Guards. But we're also seeing the vehicle, the State Patrol vehicle, move forward. And so it seems like they're continuing to clear out this perimeter as the song FTP is being played over the megaphone here in Minneapolis tonight.
Bro, I don't like give a fuck about these niggas. I thought y'all was arresting everybody with all 9 eyes. Fucking white crackers. Cracker ass, bitch ass motherfucker. Oh, y'all niggas tripping, bro.
And so this guy over here in the green hat, he is with the Lawyers Guild. Again, they are here offering legal support for the protesters who have been arrested. And it looks like the individuals who were gathered here
This
are now
is the
moving.
Minnesota State Patrol. You are in violation of an unlawful assembly. You do not cease your unlawful behavior and disperse peaceably, you will be arrested.
So this is how the first round of arrests started. Again, with this truck with the megaphone.
Your name when you're in there.
This truck with the megaphone that disperses the demands. Now again is saying the same thing. He's saying that this is an unlawful assembly, and he's asking everybody to move back. And so what we've seen is the protesters move back, which is what they were asked to do. And so now again we're seeing this line of State Patrol, conservation officers form here. And I assume that they'll continue to move forward and try to get this other crowd of folks that has started to form to disperse. They have threatened already over the megaphone to arrest individuals. They've said that this is considered unlawful assembly and have asked individuals to disperse. So it's been a few minutes now since the first demand was given, and the individuals who are here are now chanting, "Whose streets? Our streets." And again, this is all a result of people responding to the release of ex-Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin, who was arrested for the murder of George Floyd.
What's your number?
How much battery you got?
608.
So one of the protesters is yelling a number, and another member of independent media has taken that number down and is now making a phone call for one of the protesters who's being arrested today. And so we are kind of waiting around to see what's going to happen here. The state trooper vehicle has a big megaphone, and a few minutes ago it announced that so this particular device has not been used a lot here, and so this is a new tactic that we're seeing. This is used to communicate with protesters, to inform them of demands that the state patrol, and National Guard is giving. A few minutes ago, what we heard them say is that they're considering this unlawful assembly. There was a small crowd gathering here, kind of observing, speculating the arrest of these protesters. And so now the State Patrol has turned their attention toward the small crowd that was gathering and is demanding that this crowd disperse. And again, after they made that announcement, we've seen them just create that line that we've seen throughout this evening. And so we were anticipating them to move forward, but we haven't seen that happen.
This is a test of the long-range acoustic device.
And so they continue to use what they're calling the long-range acoustic device, which is extremely loud. And
this is the Minnesota State Patrol. You are in violation of an unlawful assembly. You do not cease your unlawful behavior and disperse peacefully, you will be arrested.
And so they are informing the small crowd that started to gather here that they need to disperse. We've seen some of the individuals who started to gather here disperse, but there's still a small crowd that is gathered. And there's some conflict that's happening among the protesters who are under arrest right now. Oh, and we're seeing movement. We're seeing we're hearing whistles. One of the State Patrol whistled, and there's a guy who is running back. Okay, so there's about 24 State Patrol who have now left the perimeter and are moving forward. I'm not 100% sure what they're going towards, but this is after a young lady was yelling. And I'm not sure if she was yelling at the State Patrol. That's what I'm assuming. And so there was a group of individuals who ran toward the young lady who was yelling. And then after that, a guy ran across the street. 24 State Patrol are now crossing the street. So it's a little challenging to try to decipher exactly what is happening right now.
I think those patrols are going back to the staging spot on the parking lot in Kmart, and some of these other are going inside. So I think they're wrapping up some of their operation.
So yeah, Nico, who is here on the scene behind camera, from his observation, which I believe to be accurate, the 24 State Patrol that we've seen across the street could be going back to the staging spot. When we first arrived and we were parking our vehicle, we noticed that there were over 100 State Patrol conservation officers who were gathered in the old Kmart on Lake Street, and they were there staging their deployment here for dispersing the protest that was happening. And so we just saw about 24 of them retreat, and so they all crossed the street, and now there's actually some individuals.
This is the Minnesota State Patrol
walking up with their hands up
of an unlawful assembly. If you do not cease your unlawful behavior and disperse peacefully, you will be arrested.
90% press here at this point.
So the remainder of individuals who are gathered are predominantly press with visible press passes. Other than that, it appears as though almost everybody else has dispersed. And the conservation officers and State Patrol have not yet moved forward. Their first demand was communicated about 7 to 10 minutes ago. And normally what we'll see is them communicate a demand, and within 1 to 2 minutes they move forward and they communicate another demand. But so far they've been a little stagnant. So they're just asking. There was a small crowd that was gathering here, and so they were asking for that crowd to disperse, which it appears as though that now has successfully happened without them having to move forward and take any more ground or make any additional arrests. These are much different tactics than what we saw happen during the unrest. Now we're seeing more, about 24 more State Patrol has come out, and they ran out aggressively, and it looks like they have intimidated the individuals who were here, remaining here. And so everyone else who was standing here actually just ran. And now it looks like they're slowly coming in from different ways. There's an individual who is trying to climb the fence, but she has been grabbed by the captain of the State Patrol. And she is screaming. So they have again ambushed individuals. They have slowly come in.
Sit down on the ground. You are all under arrest.
And so they are now communicating to the individuals who were gathered here to sit down on the ground. This is actually very similar to what we saw happen earlier when we first arrived. The State Patrol truck communicated to disperse, and then shortly thereafter, as people are dispersing, conservation officers, State Patrol, and National Guard are coming in from the other end to kind of ambush them and enclose them. And so we're seeing more individuals be placed under arrest. This vehicle here is being completely emptied out. Some folks here who were leaving are now being forced to get out of their vehicle and get down on the ground and are threatened to be arrested as well. And so now there was a young man who was trying to help a young lady. I'm not sure what their relationship was.
Sit down on the ground. You are all under arrest. Do it now.
And so there's demands for everybody to sit down on the ground, that they're under arrest. The first round of arrests, there was about, we're being asked to move this way, where the press is being asked to move to this corner.
That's illegal to burn or look like fire pass.
And so this advocate here, we know the guys with the individuals with the green hats are individuals here offering legal aid.
National Lawyers Guild.
The National Lawyers Guild, who's been here offering legal support for the protesters who are being arrested. And now we're seeing one of those advocates being told that he's going to be arrested. And so now press at this point, we've been told to get back to this little corner here, this sidewalk. And so what we can see from this vantage point is a little limited. However, there was a black truck that was trying to exit the area, and now all of the individuals who are in that vehicle are being pulled out of that truck and being placed under arrest. So in
Doc,
total,
what is your partner's name? Thank you.
in total, we've seen more than 24 arrests at this point. The first round of arrests.
Okay. Are you both arrested?
The first.
Okay.
So now two.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, can you tell me the names and thank you.
Two advocates from the National Lawyers Guild have been placed under arrest. One of them just through her notes. They've been here advocating and offering legal services for the protesters who are being arrested, and so she was able to give the information she's collected in this time to one of her partners. So here we're seeing another dozen, at least 12 individuals being placed under arrest. And so now we're being pushed away further.
Oh, wait, no, who's the process? Right in there is great. Thank you.
And there's two individuals here who are just sitting here who are now being placed under arrest as well. She's saying that she had nothing to do with this.
Date of birth, like you got your jail support. Don't tell the cops anything.
She said she was walking, that she was not a part of the protest.
To help you. Alana?
Yes.
When?
I was not part of a protest. I was walking down the street.
What was your date of birth,
I don't even know
Alana?
what happened today.
So there's two women who were sitting here. I don't think any of us even noticed them, but somehow one of the State Patrol noticed that they had been sitting here, and now they're also being placed under arrest. The one woman is saying that she was just kind of walking in the area, that she had no idea what was going on.
What is your date of birth? Thank you.
So when we first arrived, there were over 100 people here at the 5th Precinct protesting the release of Derek Chauvin, who is charged with the murder of George Floyd. He got out on a non-cash bond today, and so the community was responding to that. We've seen protests and march happening here in Minneapolis since about 6 o'clock this evening, and after that march ended, there was a group of individuals that came here to continue their protest at the 5th Precinct, at which time when we arrived, we had observed over 100 State Patrol and National Guard staging about 2 blocks away in the vacant Kmart on Lake Street. And so shortly thereafter, when we arrived, those officers, State Patrol conservation officers, began to move in, and they shouted demands over a loudspeaker, telling protesters to move back, to move south down Nicollet. We observed those protesters complying with the demands. They retreated more than a half a block, at which time they were ambushed from behind by Minneapolis police officers. About 24 protesters were placed under arrest. There was a large group of outreach here representing Minneapolis. I know I'm not saying that right. Minneapolis, I think, is actually how it's pronounced. And those individuals, there were more than a dozen of those individuals who were allowed to actually leave. Those are the only people that we've seen State Patrol allowed to leave the area. And so while they were detaining the first 24 protesters who they placed under arrest, there was a small crowd that started to assemble here, right here on the corner of 31st and Nicollet. And as that crowd began to grow bigger, the State Patrol then again formed their line and informed people that they needed to disperse. We saw people leaving. However, they used that same tactic where they had State Patrol come in, basically ambushing the individuals trying to leave. And so it's a little perplexing to try to understand, where they tell people to leave, and then in every direction they have units that are deployed to come in. And so it seems a little complicated to get out of it. I haven't seen, besides the one group of individuals from the nonprofit organization, we haven't seen anyone else really successfully, leave this perimeter. And so there was about 24 protesters that were arrested to begin with. And then now we're seeing about another dozen placed under arrest, including a vehicle that was leaving the area was stopped, and all people in the vehicle were told to get out of the vehicle, and they're now being placed under arrest as well. There is some legal support here to individuals from the National Lawyers Guild who are being placed under arrest. And there are a few other advocates here who are not under arrest who are going to help them, and they've also committed and communicated that they're going to help the other individuals this evening who have been arrested. And so at this point, we have been instructed to move to one corner of this intersection. They're allowing press to remain on one corner to continue to observe and report what's going on. But again, what we can see from this vantage point is a little bit limited. There's still about 100 State Patrol officers here, a handful of National Guard. I don't see many Minneapolis police officers, just a few. But predominantly this is State Patrol, conservation officers, and a handful of National Guard and MPD.
I think they're using these vans as transport vans, actually. Earlier during George Floyd uprising, the transit cops or the transit drivers, from my understanding, possibly weren't going to utilize their buses for jail transport. So these might be the new transport, or it's just the way that this system of coordination with these agencies are just utilizing these vans. But it looks like they're bringing the people to the vans.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we observed that should be noted is that when we arrived, there is a pretty big parking lot behind the 5th Precinct where all of the police vehicles are stored. And so when we were driving and trying to find somewhere to park, we observed every single vehicle in the police precinct parking lot had its lights on, it was running. And so this is definitely a coordinated tactic, a coordinated strategy that they have, very clearly, these are different agencies that have clearly been communicating with each other tonight about their tactics, their strategy, their approach. And so we saw that coordination not only in the parking lot behind the 5th Precinct, but we also saw that coordination about a block and a half away at the old Kmart on Lake Street, where they were all gathered and ultimately deployed from when they first started to approach this area. And so we saw the State Patrol and the conservation officers come in from every street to basically barricade in this intersection where protesters had been gathering.
Yes. Jill has it, I think. Okay, do you want to give it to me?
Also notable in terms of what Georgia was talking about with the interagency communication and coordination. The DNR is trained with the State Patrol and other authorities here in Minnesota quite often, and in 2018 we released some documents that showed how the DNR cops were training to go against pipeline fights of the Line 3 pipeline. And so basically, wow, they're towing this car, and these people were trying to leave at this point when they got arrested. But real quick, I wanted to just touch on, check out some of our docs that we published in 2018 showing DNR and other Minnesota agencies prepping to do security ops on behalf of pipeline company Enbridge against indigenous environmental protesters back in 2018. And the Line 3 fight continues. There was people who, here's the National Lawyers Guild, 2 of them were arrested. But real quick, the last thing about the pipelines, we also had a new article that popped up. There was a big banner hoistment over the Hiawatha Bridge a few days ago, and it said no cops and no pipelines, and it was drawing similarities between the two, and how white supremacy is enacted within these authority figures. But what we see right here is, it's like Georgia was saying, the interagency communication and coordination with each other is quite thick, and they definitely have been doing a lot more coordination, as you saw in the downtown unrest in late August, when they immediately put out state troopers into the streets of downtown. So it's a different policing era that we've embarked on here in Minneapolis that we're seeing. And as Georgia was alluding to with these unlawful assemblies, they were very quick. It was an unlawful assembly called. Within another unlawful assembly warning, they were arresting people after kettling people, which has been illegal under state law. There was a national court case against kettling. And it's just one of those things where if you allow people to exercise their freedom of speech, but then you don't allow them to leave, which we saw today, it becomes an issue for a lot of people. And so these people are just facing a sort of a misdemeanor charge, but they have to go through the booking, and they're probably going to book them all the way downtown. It's going to take a few hours to get them out, and there's going to be a lot of legal support going on and jail support going on, as we see with the Lawyers Guild also being arrested too. So it's an interesting night, probably with 30 plus arrests. Check out our website for those docs if you want to see them.
So at this point, there were a few vans, as Nico had mentioned earlier, that we saw the State Patrol placing the individuals who are under arrest in. They were not marked vehicles, but those vehicles, however, have started to leave the area. And so the first round of protesters who were placed under arrest is now being taken away to the actual jail to be booked. And now the second round of individuals who have been placed under arrest, we're seeing that they're still kind of going through the initial information process. There's definitely been kind of a coordinated approach to how they've been dealing with these mass arrests tonight. Everyone is placed under arrest, and then there's an information center where they bring each person one at a time to do somewhat of a body search and get their information. And then there's a waiting area. And so we're seeing a few more individuals who are placed under arrest. It looks like they are bringing them over here into another transport vehicle. As you can see, this individual here is under arrest, and they are being escorted into, it looked like they're being escorted into one of these vehicles. This one is actually a sheriff's vehicle, and this vehicle is marked. And so my guess is that they're starting to run out of the transportation that they had available for them tonight. And so this vehicle that's being towed, you see here being lifted up on a flatbed. There was a group of individuals who were in this vehicle who were trying to leave. What felt like was still within kind of the realm of them giving commands and asking people to leave. And for some reason, this one vehicle was stopped, and about 5 or 6 men and women were pulled out of this vehicle. They were all told to get down on their knees and that they were being arrested. We've seen those individuals be placed in plastic cuffs, and now their vehicle is being towed. So in total, this evening, as Nico mentioned, there's probably been well over 30 arrests tonight, kind of 2 different waves. Been about 2 different waves of arrests. The first wave was probably twice as big in terms of the number of individuals who were placed under arrest. Again, when we arrived, there were well over 100 individuals here protesting at the 5th Precinct. Again, this is all as a result of learning that Derek Chauvin, the ex-Minneapolis police officer charged with murder in the death of George Floyd, was released from jail today on bond, on a non-cash bond. And so the community responded today by protesting. We attended a protest. We live streamed a protest at George Floyd Square, the intersection where he was killed. That protest turned into a march that went through, South Minneapolis neighborhoods and kind of ended back near George Floyd Square. That march dispersed, and then there was a group of individuals who wanted to continue protesting tonight. And so that group of individuals, along with several others, came here to the 5th Precinct, which is in Minneapolis on Nicollet Avenue and 31st Street. And so when we arrived, there was over 100 people here. We did observe about a block and a half away at the old Kmart, a staging site where more than 100 state troopers, conservation officers, National Guard, and Minneapolis Police Department were gathering and were communicating with each other on their tactics and how they were going to move in and reclaim this space. And so we were probably only on the scene for about 5 minutes before those officers, those state troopers, started moving in. And so early on, we heard the commands that were given for people to disperse. Individuals were instructed specifically to move south. And from someone just observing what was happening, we thought that Their strategy was to come in from Nicollet and then also come in from both of these streets on, both sides of 31st and kind of push people out through Nicollet Avenue. However, what we did not anticipate was after them demanding that folks move south on Nicollet, those individuals were actually ambushed by Minneapolis Police Department, who came from behind and then started threatening to arrest people. And so at first, we weren't 100% sure if those individuals were actually going to be arrested or if this was a tactic to get people to comply and to disperse. And so we were also threatened that we were going to be arrested. And so after hearing from the captain of the State Patrol that he was going to communicate through the chain of command to the Minneapolis Police Department to let some individuals go, we ended up being among those individuals, along with one nonprofit organization that was here. And so now what we're seeing is the second wave of individuals who are placed under arrest. We'll just say after that first wave, a small crowd started to assemble here to observe and speculate. And those individuals are now, we're seeing those individuals be arrested. And so about a dozen more folks, as you can see, have been placed under arrest. And so we are isolated now to this one corner. We have been told by officials here that as press we can remain on the scene, but we are secluded, we're isolated to this one corner of this intersection. And so it appears as though the scene is clearing out. I think that is among the last individuals who were placed under arrest. It looks like there's actually a few that are still talking to State Patrol. And these individuals, if I'm not mistaken, were actually in the vehicle that was towed. And so there was a vehicle that was trying to exit the area that was pulled over, and everyone who was inside of the vehicle was forced to get out of the vehicle and was immediately placed under arrest. Surprisingly, I think we were expecting to see more National Guard, visible here in Minneapolis after the news of Derek Chauvin being released on bond, on bail. And we actually have not seen a ton of National Guard out here tonight, only a handful. However, we have seen very precise tactics that have been enforced across multiple different agencies. The State Patrol, conservation officers, the National Guard, Minneapolis Police Department, all working hand in hand to disperse the protest that was forming outside of the 5th Precinct, and ultimately arresting probably about 30 people tonight. As you can see here, small groups of the State Patrol are kind of congregating. The lieutenant actually told individuals to spread out. He gave a command to his fellow officers to spread out. And so now we've seen them continuing to hold this perimeter, hold this space, but not as many. And the few that are out here outside of the individuals that are holding the line, the other patrols that are here are now starting to congregate in small groups and kind of just talk as the last few arrests are being processed. So we see a vehicle that is trying to enter the area here, and State Patrol is giving them commands to turn around. And so I think it would probably be challenging at this point to know what was going on here. And so now the individual is getting out of the vehicle. They don't know what's going on.
You too.
So this individual is getting out of the vehicle, or maybe not sure what to do, now getting back in the vehicle, and now is actually turning around.
A lot of times they would shoot at the vehicles during the unrest downtown as well as during the uprising. Surprised they didn't shoot at it.
Yeah, they definitely had their guns drawn, which...
With marker rounds and other crowd controlled weapons, but like, why? This isn't Iraq, you know. Community member. Now he's going down the wrong street because he's all bugged out. He went the wrong way down a one-way.
Yeah, pretty tense there. I mean, there is a sign at the end of the street, but usually when it's in the middle like that, you can still kind of cross through, especially if you live in the neighborhood. And so I think earlier it would have kind of made more sense because there were a ton of marked vehicles here in this area, but most of those vehicles now have left, transporting the protesters who were arrested to jail. And so now, as you can see, there's only this one vehicle that's still here. So if you're coming from the other end, you probably don't know what's going on. And so we just saw a vehicle kind of pull up, a little startled. The guy didn't really know what to do or what was going on. He got out of his car, got back in his car, and I think finally started to get the message and turned around. So there's a few more protesters who are being arrested that are in that makeshift information hub. And it looks like there's another individual, well, two people on a scooter who were attempting to enter this area, who have been instructed to leave the area. And they are now leaving. We were hearing a lot of reports about the National Guard being deployed tonight, and my guess is that the National Guard was on standby if these different agencies were not able to get the crowd under control. You can see a few National Guardsmen here tonight, but just I only see 3. I've only seen about a handful, and so my guess is that they were probably on standby. However, between the State Patrol, the conservation officers, Minneapolis Police Department, those agencies were able to work together tonight to regain this intersection. And as a result of them trying to regain it, they ended up arresting about 2 or 3 dozen protesters tonight. Just observing those arrests happen, you know, it's really challenging to understand how someone who did come out here to protest peacefully could even leave this area once they started coming in, because they had their troops coming in from every way, eventually ambushing the crowd, and lots of community members. I definitely saw at least one photographer who was arrested. We were threatened to be arrested by Minneapolis police as well. We at one point were instructed to get down on the ground and told that we were under arrest. Luckily that panned out differently for us, and we were recognized by press, by the State Patrol, and they allowed us to leave the area where they began to secure all of the protesters that they were arresting.
I think that after closely looking at the camouflage, I think those are special response teams. Like this truck of the state trooper is a special response team, and I think that, or the mobile response, SRT, special response, and I think that there might not be any guardsmen out here right now. They might just be protecting their own places of government interest, and that these special response squads, there's actually one at each unit, like each spot up here on 31st, behind us on 31st, there's another one back there, back here, there's another one, and then beyond that, I'm pretty sure that there will be another couple up there. And so I think that the way that they've done it with the special response teams, I'm not sure that they've used the National Guard here tonight, although a couple of them definitely looked like they were. But yeah, it's hard to tell. But I'm thinking that maybe they just have the guardsmen, you know, sort of watching the Capitol, watching other government installations, possibly. Yeah, this actually the first time I've seen personally a state trooper or a state patrol special response team with the LRAD on the truck. That's the first time I've seen that.
So there's two individuals who are approaching the area, or they're leaving the area, that they were yelling.
Were they the ones saying, "I love you, we love you"?
I think so.
Maybe. Hard to tell.
Among the second round of arrests were two individuals with the National Lawyers Guild, which was really shocking to witness them be placed under arrest. They, you know, predominantly have hung tight to the media, and, you know, they come on scenes like this to offer legal support for protesters. And so what we observed them doing appeared to be within the parameters of what they normally do. Of their team of 4, 2 were actually placed under arrest tonight. And so now at this point, we're just kind of hanging out, observing how they plan to disperse themselves this evening.
I'm surprised they don't have more transport vehicles ready. All those vehicles they just were bringing cops in, it seems, but they didn't have any transport vehicles. Interesting.
So the process that we observed of, you know, how they're doing things in terms of dealing with these arrests, they would arrest individuals and then escort them over here to this Metro Transit hub, where they would pat them down, do a search, and then it appeared as though they were getting information from them, talking to them, writing in their notebook, possibly making a report. From that point, we would see them move each individual who's under arrest on these stairs, which would serve as a waiting area. And they had multiple vans that were lined up here, unmarked vans, that they would then start to escort those individuals into. And then we would see those vans kind of leave out sporadically. And so now that all of those vans are gone, we're kind of wondering at this point, with about a dozen people left to transport, we're kind of speculating and trying to figure out exactly how are they going to transport those individuals to the jail. And so maybe they will have those vehicles come back and do a second trip. But at this point now, these individuals who have been placed under arrest have been sitting on these stairs outside of the 5th Precinct for about 20 or 30 minutes now at this point. And so there's another vehicle that is trying to just drive down the street here. On this end, there's actually, I don't think there is a do not enter sign. And so if you're in this neighborhood, if you live in this neighborhood, there's likely no way for you to know like what exactly is happening here. And so this vehicle is driving up and is now turning around. And so as you can see, about 24 State Patrol and conservation officers responded rather quickly. Several of them have their gun drawn at this point, vehicles that are just driving in the area and now being forced to turn around. That's probably the 3rd or 4th car that we've seen now, kind of back to back.
The city's got that. Never met somebody before that's really good. Crazy. Oh yeah.
So we've actually been on the scene here for about 2 hours. I believe we arrived around 10. And at that time, this process was just beginning. State troopers, conservation officers, Minneapolis Police Department had just begun to move in on the protest. About between 100 and 200 people gathered here protesting in front of the 5th Precinct. The release of Derek Chauvin, ex-Minneapolis cop who was charged with the murder of George Floyd. He was released from jail today in Minneapolis on a non-cash bond. And so the community responded protesting the fact that he had been released. And almost immediately when we arrived, we saw these troopers, conservation officers moving in, asking folks to disperse. However, there was really nowhere ultimately for them to disperse to, because as you can see in this intersection, they were strategically placed. The state troopers were strategically placed when they started to come in at every block, at the corner of every block. And so as they asked people to disperse from every way, troopers, conservation officers started to move in, and protesters were specifically asked asked to go south down Nicollet, which at the time did appear to be the only way to go, because you could visibly see at that point troopers coming in from these other 3 streets. So it appeared as though people who wanted to leave could leave south on Nicollet. But after about maybe 7 to 10 minutes, protesters were ambushed by the Minneapolis Police Department, who then started informing protesters that they were going to be arrested. We saw 24 protesters placed under arrest. We were threatened that we were going to be arrested. We were told to get down on the ground. After communicating with the captain of the State Patrol, he said that he would talk through his chain of command to kind of get things worked out with MPD. And so we were allowed to leave that kind of, I guess, barricade. And there was about a dozen individuals with Minneapolis who were also able to leave that area as well. After those arrests happened, the troopers instructed us to come out on this side of 31st Avenue, where we started to observe another group of individuals starting to gather, people just kind of spectating. And at that time, after about 20 minutes of processing the protesters who were under arrest, they started that process again. And so we saw the state trooper make the announcement for everyone to disperse. Shortly thereafter, we saw
MSB3.
MSP3
Minnesota State Patrol
formation.
3rd unit coming formation
was just yelled out, and now we're seeing all of these troops run into the center of this intersection. And so it appears as though everyone is being gathered to disperse. We're hearing one of the State Patrol yell a command of double column, and so we're seeing 2 lines formed. And so it appears at this point that the State Patrol and conservation officers are being requested to stand down. So, and as you can see here on the right, that appears to be all of the State Patrol officers. And then here to the left, they've coordinated all of the conservation officers who are what it appears to be standing down at this point. So here is an unmarked police vehicle that is now turning around.
Neighborhood reporters.
That was my camera. I was thinking about
So we still haven't been able to quite figure out exactly how these remaining protesters or remaining individuals, some of these individuals actually are not protesters. They were just gathering here. We're kind of wondering how are they going to be transported, because it doesn't really appear that they have any more vehicles designated to transport folks who have been placed under arrest. And I'd like to point out that 2 of the individuals who are under arrest are from the National Lawyers Guild, who are actually here offering legal support to the protesters who were placed under arrest. And during that second sweep, we saw those two legal advocates be placed under arrest. And now we're seeing the State Patrol in an organized way exit the area. In an organized two-column line with one who's actually a shooter who's crowd control and kind of protecting them. He definitely looked our way as they walked by. And so they've identified, it looked like someone who was over there, but it appears to maybe just be a noise. Or not. He's actually moving closer that way, flashing his light at a vehicle. So there's a vehicle. Nobody was in the vehicle, but just securing the perimeter.
They're going to the precinct, or they're going to the back of the precinct possibly.
They're moving to what appears to be the back of the precinct at this point, as things are starting to wrap up here at the 5th Precinct tonight in Minneapolis. And so we're seeing group by group, the State Patrol and the conservation officers gather and disperse. Small group of conservation officers exiting the area. They appear to be leaving, heading down Nicolet Avenue back towards the old Kmart on Lake Street. And so again, this evening what we saw was State Patrol and conservation officers coming in from every direction. And so potentially they could actually be leaving back out in that same order.
Officers are still on top of the roof of the precinct.
Yeah, and this evening we've seen throughout the night 2 officers who have been standing guard on the roof of the 5th Precinct, and it appears as though those 2 officers are still on the roof, although it's pretty dark, so I'm not really sure if you would be able to make it out. Actually, one of them is shining a light now at something. And so yeah, there was 2 officers for the entire evening that were positioned.
When we were coming to the scene, there was a firework that was lit, and that possibly, somebody had said possibly that it was thrown at the building. So it might have been they're assessing if a firework had popped off on their roof. That could be a possibility. The 5th Precinct was
or they lost something.
Or they lost something, lost their keys. 5th Precinct was sort of vandalized about a month and a half ago, and some fireworks were thrown on top of the roof, and so could be a similar scene. Right.
So there's a vehicle that is driving through. There's a vehicle trying to drive through, and State Patrol and conservation officers are giving demands for them to turn around. It just appears to be a woman who maybe lives in the area. She said needs to put it. She said she couldn't see. The light was in her eye.
Their response was pay attention.
And so now she is turning around. Yeah, at this point, it's pretty challenging, I think, for individuals in this area who are not familiar with what's happening right now. It's probably challenging for them to know what's happening here and that they're not supposed to be driving through this area. Only on this street is there one sign, but it's kind of placed in it's actually, well, if you look at it, it's placed on the right side of the street. And typically, if you're not allowed to go through at all, that sign would be on the left side of the street, preventing individuals from coming through. So it might be helpful to actually move that sign to prevent more moments like what we just saw. And then on this end of the street where we've seen about 5 or 6 cars come through, there's actually no do not enter signs. And so if you're in the area and you're not aware what's going on, it's probably really hard to know that you're not supposed to come down the street right now. And so now we're seeing conservation officers who have formed a line again after it appeared that they were going to be dispersing. They're now standing guard again to prevent anyone from coming into this perimeter. So we're filming, and obviously it's dark, so we have a light attached to our camera, and we were just instructed by one of the troopers here behind me to stop shining the light in his face, which is challenging because it's dark and the light is needed to be able to capture anything out here. And so now we're seeing again here the conservation officers responding to another car coming down the street, which definitely got the message quicker than the last car and turned around rather fast. So there's 2 people walking down the street who are giving commands to turn around and go the other way. And it looks like the transportation for the remaining individuals who are under arrest has arrived.
Dude, I'm not in your face, man. I'm over here filming.
Trying to see the vehicles. So we're being instructed again to stop shining the light, which is just challenging because it's a part of our equipment for us to be able to do our jobs. It's really dark out here. It's midnight, so the only light that we have to kind of help show you, our audience, what's going on is the street lights and the lights that's attached to our camera, which is standard equipment for broadcasting in situations like this, in dark situations and outdoor night situations. But agitating some of the state patrol who are here tonight. And so we're seeing These conservation officers and state patrol retreat now. It looks like they're leaving and they're getting into these vehicles, which we actually thought were here to transport the rest of the individuals who are under arrest. But in fact, these vehicles are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 small buses that are here. You often see these kind of shuttles at like hotels. There's 6 or 7 of them lined up to escort these state patrol officers and conservation officers out of the area. In addition to these buses, it looks like there's 2 other trucks that are here, as well as this truck here that we see state patrol getting into as well. And so they are now leaving the area. There's still about a dozen of them remaining here, standing with the individuals who have been arrested tonight. We see this conservation officer who is removing a flag from the area. It's a little challenging to see.
It was a Circle A.
It was a Circle A. It's being removed potentially as evidence.
Did you see what kind of flag that was?
Yeah, it was a Circle A.
Okay.
Black with an anarchist symbol.
And so there's might be problematic at this point. Are they going to start letting? Oh, okay. So that is the unmarked vans have returned.
Like they put it in. Like why are they putting the state trooper here?
Yeah, that's
They're putting all the
It
evidence
looks like
in
they're
there?
keeping that one and not keeping it with the person. That's for sure. That flag was definitely to them a threat, possibly.
Throughout the night, we've seen a helicopter kind of circle the area. In the evening time, you definitely can't make out exactly. Can't make out who the chopper belongs to. Sometimes it's media, and sometimes it is the police. So there's an individual on a bike, and they're still not allowing people to come through at this time. Although most of the state patrol and conservation officers have dispersed, the few that are here are continuing to secure the perimeter. And so now we're seeing the remaining individuals who are under arrest. We're seeing them actually brought into the vehicles to be transported to jail. Now, remind you, this second group of people that were arrested were actually outside of the perimeter they had secured. There was a small crowd forming after about 20 protesters were placed under arrest. A small crowd started to form, and after about 15-20 minutes of this small crowd forming, they began their tactics again to disperse the crowd. It was a very small crowd, and during their tactics to disperse the crowd, they ended up placing another dozen people under arrest, including a vehicle that was leaving the area that had about 5 or 6 people in it. They pulled that car over as it was trying to leave the area and forced those individuals to get out. We also saw 2 individuals with the National Lawyers Guild be placed under arrest, who are here offering legal support for the protesters who had been arrested.
Did you see the 2 women over here? They released them, or if they?
I didn't see them.
Yeah, I saw them get brought up here.
Oh,
the NLG?
No, the two ladies. White women.
Oh, I don't know. Good question.
I never saw
They, because I remember them walking them over there, and they did cry a lot. So, and they were older white women. So,
they might have let him go.
No, actually, I think that's them right there.
Oh, okay, yep.
Nope, they're right there.
Actually, some of these buses have their insignia on them. That one said MSP3, like we had heard, you know, the MSP3 roll out in 2 columns or whatever. That bus that just left literally said that on the side. This MSP2. This one says MSP2.
They're old Metro Mobility.
Yeah, they are. DNR2 and MSP2.
And so my guess is we saw all of these vehicles when we were parking. We saw these vehicles all gathered over at the old Kmart on Lake Street. And so, you know, whether these vehicles are theirs and they own them or they're using them, there is a Metro Transit that's located right across the street from the 5th Precinct. And so potentially they could have partnered with Metro Transit to use these vehicles today. And then as Nico pointed out, you could see written on the windows what unit you know, these vehicles were transporting, whether it was MSP or DNR. And so as you see here, it says MSP3, which I believe stands for Minnesota State Patrol Unit 3. And so what we saw on each window of these buses, these small buses, was either MSP for Minnesota State Patrol or DNR, which would have carried the conservation officers. And so now it looks like they're opening this intersection back up. We've seen a few vehicles that did not belong to the police or the state patrol or conservation have actually been able to go through. And so that's the first that we're seeing this. See, this car just drove by and the driver actually flicked off the state patrol. And I think we've seen a lot of that, you know, throughout the community and community's response to the way that policing has showed up and responded to the protests.
hey man, how's it going?
And so maybe about 10 minutes ago, this truck pulled up here. There's a small group of young folks who have started to congregate beside it.
There's also a congregation of people back behind that police line on 33rd, 32nd. Can't tell what street it is. You see it? Can you see?
Was it somebody protesting?
Yeah, it's this family, man.
Yeah.
We're pretty sure it's that.
So if the first round of protest happened on 31st. So if you were
Like the shoes. I definitely see those 2 women that were not part of it still arrested.
Yeah, there was some question. There was 2 women who were actually older white women that were sitting pretty quietly. We had not noticed them behind some barricades, next to a fence, really out of the way. And after the second round of arrests had been made, we as press were instructed to move As you can see here, there's a truck that's going through rather slowly at this point, playing loud music. So after the second round of arrests, the media was instructed to move to one corner of this intersection. And upon doing so, State Patrol pushed us over here to this one corner. They observed these two women who began to cry and plead and, inform them that they had no idea, what was going on and that they weren't protesting. And so we weren't sure whether or not those two individuals were let go. However, we have identified them among the line of individuals who are standing here who are arrested and are waiting for transportation to the jail. And so pretty much everybody besides press and a small group of people from Minneapolis, besides press in Minneapolis, everyone else who was in this area was arrested tonight. So you can see there has been a helicopter that has been circling the area this evening. We've been out here for over 2 hours now at this point, and throughout the duration of our time here, we have consistently seen this helicopter just kind of circling the area, monitoring the situation, and cannot quite make out in the dark who it belongs to, if it's media or if it's owned by authorities or a government agency, but it definitely has been consistently circling the area tonight.
They just hacked it. Kettle.
So one thing I wanted to point out as we're just kind of waiting, I think that they're waiting for vehicles to come and take the rest of the individuals who are under arrest to jail. One thing I want to point out actually is these I'm not 100% sure what they're called, but metal barricades that are owned by the Minneapolis Police Department. We've seen these pop up in Minnesota since the killing of George Floyd. We've also seen fences, just different tactics for police precincts to try to protect themselves. And so I believe these were initially put out to try to put a barricade between protesters and the Minneapolis 5th Precinct here. However, when we arrived on the scene, protesters started being ambushed by the State Patrol and conservation officers, and we saw the protesters actually take these metal barricades and move them. We also saw them use a vehicle to try to barricade themselves. But all of those efforts were actually unsuccessful. It did stall the State Patrol from being able to arrest any of the protesters. The State Patrol actually had to physically move all of these metal barricades out of the way. And so that took some time and delayed their ability to be able to detain protesters. But what we witnessed tonight was State Patrol conservation officers coming in this area and arresting more than 24 individuals. There was 2 waves of arrest. The first wave of arrest was that initial protest group that had started to form here outside of the 5th Precinct. They were instructed to move south, to exit south of Nicollet, and upon doing so and complying with all of the demands, They were ambushed by the Minneapolis Police Department, who came from behind as they were moving back, at which point Minneapolis Police Department started telling everybody that they were under arrest, including myself and Nico, who's on the camera tonight. During that time period, we saw an individual on a scooter who actually tried to leave the area. A marker round was shot at him. However, I don't think that they hit him because we never saw them, bring him back around. And so we believe he was able to leave the area. And so after about 15 minutes of them arresting protesters, the captain of the State Patrol came and approached us and told us that he would be communicating through the chain of command to the Minneapolis Police Department to try to get some stuff worked out. And so we were actually able to leave the perimeter that they had created. In addition to Unicorn Riot being able to leave that perimeter, they also allowed about a dozen people with Minneapolis leave that perimeter, at which time we all kind of were instructed to leave outside of 31st Street. You can see this helicopter here continuing to circle the area and now spotlighting something below on the other side of this perimeter that they've created. And so so after that first round of arrests, we were instructed to come on this side of 31st Street. And so we've been on this side. We can't visibly see what's happening on the other side where that spotlight is being pointed. It's more than a block away of what they're pointing at. But after we came out on this side of 31st Street, a small group of folks started to assemble. Maybe 20 or 30 people started to assemble here, speculate, and chant, basically communicating to these troops, the State Patrol and the conservation officers, that the arrest of the protesters was wrong. We also saw 4 members from the National Lawyers Guild arrive on the scene, offering legal services to the protesters who had been arrested. Maybe after 20 minutes of this small group assembling, we saw the same exact tactics used by the State Patrol, where they announced over their loudspeaker that they were considering this unlawful assembly and that folks needed to disperse. But as folks dispersed, whether they went left, right, or forward, they were met with more officers who ultimately placed them under arrest. And so it was kind of difficult to watch individuals who were trying to leave the area, because ultimately once that announcement was made, they were unable to leave. And so another 12 arrests or so were made at that time, including 2 individuals from the National Lawyers Guild. And so right now we're hearing FTP shouted by a handful of young folks, and it appears as though a couple of the State Patrol officers may be moving that way to respond to it. However, they're kind of yelling FTP and also walking the opposite direction. And so if you're just tuning in, there was a mass presence of State Patrol tonight and conservation officers. Definitely over 100 officers were deployed tonight. Six buses worth, 6 small buses worth. Actually more than that, but that was to kind of give you a scope of about how many. They had shuttle buses that shuttled these State Patrol and conservation officers to this area to be deployed to really de-escalate the protest and ultimately kind of make a point to the protesters tonight that their actions would not be tolerated. And so now it appears as though they're just waiting for transportation for these last 10 or so individuals who have been placed under arrest. Not sure if you can see it from here, but one of the individuals standing up has on a green hat. And that is actually the folks from the National Lawyers Guild. who were also arrested. They were here just offering legal support for the protesters.
Total, yeah.
So it looks like they're taking some of the plexi cuffs off.
I've seen them do it to 2 or 3 other people, and they might put them on the front.
So allowing this gentleman here to stretch his arms. Folks have been, folks who were placed under arrest with the plexi cuffs have been kind of standing out here, some of them for well over an hour now. So it looks like this officer is moving a backpack, potentially placed into evidence. It may have been the property of one of the individuals who was arrested. We did see one of the photographers who is often out photographing these protests. We did see at least one photographer arrested. So I'm not sure if that was her backpack, but it definitely did look like a backpack with equipment in it. So now we're actually seeing traffic come down the street. About 30 minutes ago, they were still holding the area, now not allowing any traffic to come through across 31st Street. So they've opened that back up. However, they're still holding the line here to prevent individuals from entering down the block of the 5th Precinct. And so I can see actually another large group of officers that are coming down or coming up the block now towards the 5th Precinct. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but looks like more than 24 people are walking up towards the 5th Precinct. I'm not sure if you can see them.
Possible arrestees.
So we will wait and see. You can't tell from where we're standing. We are still forced to kind of stay outside of the perimeter that the State Patrol has created, but we're seeing a large group of Minneapolis police officers and State Patrol coming up with potential with potentially maybe more people who have been arrested. And so there's 2 sheriff trucks that have arrived, which will likely serve as transport for some of the people who have been arrested.
I think the khaki jeans was not an arrestee. I think there was a camo on the officer. I don't know if they had any arrestees back there. I think I might have been wrong on that.
So these 2 trucks that have just arrived are transporting individuals who were arrested to jail. There's a final pat down that's being done. You can see a female officer here who's patting down a woman. I think sometimes there are restrictions to men being able to do pat down searches of women. So we're seeing a woman conduct that search now. Unlike some of the other arrests that we've seen, there have been 2 purses that were just put in the back of this sheriff's truck.
How far did you have to walk? Okay. Not too bad. They used Kmart as their staging and then this is their processing.
I believe this woman here specifically was just kind of sitting and watching everything that was happening. There was a nearby fence, and no one actually knew that she was there. It was her and a friend. And after the second round, or during the second round of arrests, police identified her and her friend just kind of sitting behind a fence and instructed them that they were going to be placed under arrest, at which time they communicated to the officers that they were not a part of the protest, that they were just walking the area, that they really had no idea what was going on, and were still arrested. And so pretty much anyone who was within this area that was not identified as media tonight was arrested, although we did see one group of folks who were with Minneapolis who were allowed to leave tonight as well. The Minneapolis Lawyers Guild was also present. About 4 advocates were on scene offering legal advice and legal services to the protesters who had been arrested. And unfortunately, 2 of their representatives were also placed under arrest. So tonight in total, we've probably seen about 30 arrests through two different sweeps that happened. The first sweep was a large crowd of protesters, and that turned out about 24 arrests. And then after that sweep was done, a small crowd of people started to gather outside of the perimeter that the State Patrol and conservation officers had formed. And that small group then was also told to disperse, at which time several of those individuals were placed under arrest as well. So we've been out here now 2.5, 3 hours, streaming live at the Minneapolis 5th Precinct, which started out as a protest and has ended with more than 30 individuals being arrested. Since the murder of George Floyd, we have seen precincts across the metro area in St. Paul and Minneapolis both have heightened security at the precincts since the burning of the 3rd precinct. A lot of times these precincts now will have barricades, they'll have fences, brick walls, just different tactics to offer some type of barricade in the event where protesters or rioters are trying to damage the precinct. And so we actually didn't see any of that tonight. We saw protesters who were gathered here who were chanting chants for George Floyd. The officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck, he was actually released from jail today on a non-cash bond. And so the community in Minneapolis here has responded, protesting, and in response to their protest, Minneapolis Police Department, State Patrol, conservation officers have worked together to arrest about 30 people tonight.
See 2 more transit vehicles have come up. Not sure if it'll be able to fit everybody in them. One is probably a female-bodied, one is a male-bodied transport vehicle. We'll see if they can fit them all. Definitely not going to be able to fit them all. From the looks of these, it's really only like, well, you can't see in there, but it really only looks like one seat on one side, a cage, and possibly a seat in the back. Not sure how much people they'll be able to fit. Still some voices from the periphery streets, some youth yelling "fuck 12." So on the way distance, there's a large line of police officers down in Nicollet. Maybe not police officers, excuse me, Conservation and State Patrol. So I'm not sure what kind of resistance is going on down there, or if people are out in the street at all. There was that helicopter that was shining over that distance area very recently with a spotlight.
You take pictures of me, Chris? I better look good. Okay, cool.
Talking to Chris June, an independent photographer. There was actually another photographer who got arrested, the one that George had spoke about. Was saying, if you're taking pictures of me, I hope I look good. Chris said yes. Again, these people are probably most likely facing misdemeanor unlawful assembly charges. They should be released after processing, unless they have warrants or were caught with other illegal substances or weapons or who knows. But again, as Georgia alluded to multiple times, there was a brief unlawful assembly order, and then there was a Kettle. The Kettle happened as the unlawful assembly was being ordered, and the Kettle came in from all sides. They told people to move south down Nicollet while there were still police cars down there, so a lot of people didn't go down because they were sort of fearful of going into the police line. They're taking multiple people out of this transport vehicle. Couple of Minneapolis police vehicles moving, starting to clear some of Nicollet. Looks like they brought a military vehicle right here, MRAP of some sort with the LRAD on top. They did not use this. They used the state trooper LRAD that was on top of the mobile response team. A hand just came up and moved part of the top. Well, they closed the manhole, I think, and then that's where you can see the LRAD speaker. Sorry about the zoom out. Camera's having some difficulties with the light, lack thereof. We'll get a close-up view of this thing. State Patrol, Special Response Team, SRT. Yeah, they have one right there and one on that special. This is the mobile response team up here, I think.
Yeah.
And then they have the special response team with the MRAP.
And the mobile response team took the flag.
Yep. And the mobile response team was also the ones doing the announcements and activating the LRAD.
Did they ever use it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they used
just to make announcements?
No,
Well,
they
also
used it too.
to
Yep.
flip, like, there was something that
They did the ear piercing. Yeah. Not very long, but it was definitely. Yeah, it was long enough for sure.
I guess they gotta start bringing fucking earmuffs.
Yes. Earmuffs, earplugs. Right now they're moving the LRAD speaker from the front. It looks like they were undoing it. And they're putting in the back seat of the mobile response team vehicle. One person had his laundry in there, it looked like. He had some shirts that he was holding and he was moving them back around in the back seat. Like they were on hangers, straight from the cleaners. Must have been running his errands before this. Yeah. How many? A handful, yeah. Definite handful left.
I thought they were going to let the people from the National Guard go.
That was wild. Saw a couple sort of violent arrests. Most of the other arrests were just telling people to sit down and lay down. Most people complied. A couple people took off, tried to escape. As Georgia alluded to, there was one person who appeared to have left on a scooter up the street down Nicollet and then jumped over a fence. A rubber or a marker round or a rubber bullet was shot at him or that person, and they seem to have escaped. You see inside the precinct they have all the lights shut, so when they walk through, they actually, you can watch them walk through because they have to use their flashlights. That was a tactic that they also used during early in the summer when people would come to protest around the precinct. They would also shut all of the lights off. Again, thank you all for tuning in. This is Nico in Georgia, out here on 31st and Nicollet Avenue on the south side of Minneapolis. We are broadcasting live through Unicorn Riot. Check us out on the internet, unicornriot.ninja. It's our website. Check us out on Twitter, _ninja. We have a lot more tweets than we do other social media and other places. We do have an Instagram we're trying to populate a little bit more, unicorn.riot, Facebook, YouTube, and Vimeo. Check us out on all those platforms. If you have the financial privilege and ability, the only way we are able to be out here in the streets is from you. So thank you for donating. Thank you for allowing us to continue our work, bringing context, social, environmental struggles from the front lines. If you have the financial privilege, as I was saying, and you like our work, go to unicornriot.ninja/donate and maybe become a micro-monthly donor. We definitely would appreciate that and love it. All of the support that we've received this summer is amazing and we love it, and thank you very much. You are only ensuring our platform to be here for the foreseeable future. and to be better than we were before. So thank you.
People hit us up like, why aren't you guys there? I was like, where? We have to go to Unicorn Riot first.
Neighborhood reporters over here doing their thing. Hey, hey.
Unicorn Riot.
Check out their work, neighborhood reporter.
Yeah, I mean, like, the big guys are not out here. You know what I mean? Like, the channels are not out here. Unfortunately. Really? Who do you work for? If you don't mind.
So I work in stories about being a biracial woman.
It's getting really cold out here as the police are wrapping up their operation. They're still waiting on a couple transport vehicles to transport the last detainees that they've arrested for unlawful assembly. This is after a march that came from George Floyd Square, started from George Floyd Square, walked through the south side, down Chicago, up Portland, back over to 37th. Some left from that march and went on another march. That other march went over here to the 5th Precinct. There was people gathering here at the 5th Precinct for about a half hour before the police came in, kettled everybody, threatened arrests for everybody, and did make about 30 arrests. Or so, it's tough to tell. Quite a few of the people were trying to leave, not trying to be arrested, and they were still arrested. We saw a couple of violent arrests where the police were sort of tackling people. We saw a person trying to jump over a fence and then get arrested. They were just trying to leave, as they had said multiple times. And then also their friends were arrested for trying to help them. An officer was holding on to a young person as they were trying to scale the fence, and they eventually pulled her down, or let that person get down. And the person that was actually trying to help them from behind the fence was forcibly tackled and arrested pretty violently. We didn't see any vandalism, any kind of ill treatment towards any of the property out here. We had heard, and there was definitely, like, I saw a video very recently of somebody throwing a firework that blew up on top of the precinct. Immediately sort of after that is when the police made their moves. They were already staging, and they were already going to make their move. Pretty positively, as they were staging at Kmart, they're not going to be doing all of what they were doing and getting ready the way they were getting ready without making a move. So it's pretty obvious what was happening at that point. And again, this all sort of boils down from the Derek Chauvin being released. Derek Chauvin, the officer who kneeled on George Floyd's neck for about 10 minutes, was released on cash bond, no cash bond today. It was taken up by a group called Allegheny Casualty Company, who essentially is the securitor of Derek Chauvin, meaning that if he were to violate his conditions of bail, they would be on the hook for paying the $1 million bail that he has. There's a court coming up, a trial coming up March 2021. That trial will feature four ex-Minneapolis police officers employed at the 3rd Precinct before May 25th, who were fired quickly after the murder of George Floyd. Charges were brought after multiple businesses and buildings were burnt in Minneapolis. There was a police stand down. The police were nowhere to be found for multiple days as the protests were happening. Some people call what happened a silent strike organized and orchestrated by Bob Kroll, the police union head. People say that that plays a part into their narrative, especially that they've done this summer, where their narrative is any crime that happens, we need more police, and the reason why any crime is happening is because the police aren't on the streets, and it's the police's fault it's the community's fault or the city council's fault. They called for the defunding of the police officers, that this violence is happening, not the conditions, not the reality that the police have never been able to. They've never been the creator of stopping crime. What they've done from the community's perspective, from what people are talking about multiple times in this today even, was the occupation of a land and them utilizing their power and authority and power structure to disregard people's grievances, allowing them for some constitutional rights of protest and then cracking down upon that. But in general, what I've heard from the community is state retaliation, continual state retaliation from the authorities to the community in Minneapolis. Minneapolis police officers are very rarely Minneapolis residents. They're mostly from out of the city, and they come into the city, and it's not their community. And so a lot of people have been talking about that difficulty as well. And when it comes to that specific difficulty, people have been talking about, there might be some ways forward with community policing. There might be some ways forward with abolishing the police. There might be some ways forward with utilizing neighborhood organizations or neighborhood groups that would be providing a better safety net than the police would. And we saw earlier the Minneapolis, or what their organization is called, I cannot specifically remember. They were released from being arrested. They, I